House Appropriations Subcommittee on School Aid and Department of Education will come to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Representative Kelly.
Here.
Representative Jenkins-Arno.
Here.
Representative Markkinen.
Here.
Representative Beeson.
Here.
Representative Borton.
Here.
Representative Glanville.
Here.
Representative Steckloff. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Borton moves to approve the minutes. If there's no objections, the minutes are approved. Today we have a presentation on Michigan personalized learning. Even my first tour here several years ago, this was an area of education I was immensely concerned with, and that I think that they're doing absolutely wonderful things for a lot of students that have otherwise may not be there. And unfortunately, even the first term my first tour, and it continues, a Department of Ed that is not very accommodating to these people for the most part, arguing over different times and FTEs and all these different things. And it's for a state or for an industry that needs to do as much of what we can to personalize learning. These people are I think you're gonna witness that represent that as best as Michigan has. And at the same time, Department of Ed that wants to hinder their growth. It's a mystery to me after you hear some of the testimony today about what they're doing. So today we have with us Mitch Cummings, Director of Off-Site and Alternative Programs, Berrien Springs Public Schools. We have Dr. Rebecca Redmer, Executive Director of Innovative Programming, Jenison Public Schools, as well as Lisa Sitkins, President and CEO, LSS Connections and Consulting, My Co-op. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
There you go. All right. It's a gloomy morning here, so looking for some sunshine. I'd like to thank the committee members here today for your time and for your important work that you do on behalf of education. I'm Dr. Rebecca Redmer, and as stated, Executive Director of Innovative Programming at Jenison Public Schools. I'm in my 27th year of public education. And I'm here with some colleagues, Lisa Sitkins and Mitch Cummings, and each of us will be focusing on a specific barrier we've experienced professionally as practitioners today. And the presentation format is broken into thirds with room for questions built in directly following each section. Unless there's another protocol you'd like us to follow, we'd be happy to make adjustments along the way. So let's get started. You might be wondering who makes up the Personalized Learning Task Force. And we are a group of educators that came together rather organically. We live in the digital world, all of us, and we have in common the desire to meet the unique needs of students. And the primary anchor or common background we share is our experience within digital teaching and learning and innovation. There are about 20 school districts that are represented within this group. And as a side note, when I say the term or use the term digital, it's a pretty broad use of a term, but it includes online learning, virtual learning, hybrid learning, blended learning. This group meets quarterly, and we started meeting back in 2023. Sometimes more if there's the need, if there's a specific barrier or additional challenge that has come our way. It's truly a collaborative space for us to connect and discuss how to grow our abilities to personalize learning for students using digital strategies and exploring unconventional methods. It feels like a grassroots effort to really elevate our abilities across educational contexts. So in terms of a belief, when educators get together, we've got to organize, what our mission is and what our beliefs are. And we truly believe in the all in every beginning of each of these statements. All students deserve access to high quality learning. All families deserve to be educated to know what their choices are in terms of educational programs available to them. All programs deserve resilient, rigorous, and appropriate academic measures. Our objectives are essentially three key areas. One is to educate, which we're here today, and we're so grateful for this opportunity to share with stakeholders the dynamics of personalized learning. Establish high quality standards for innovative and non-conventional educational programs in schools, and explore effective measures for ensuring the success of students participating in innovative and non-conventional education programs. So my section today, my third, is I'm going to be talking about shared time students. And shared time students is a term that we use when we're really in the weeds trying to navigate funding and FTEs and serving all students. As a systems level leader, it becomes challenging when you run into operational barriers that limit opportunities for students. This is one where my colleagues and I have found ourselves navigating that MDE categorizes as shared time students. Now, non-public students, also homeschooling students, are kind of in that same category, are referenced in multiple locations statutorily, such as the State School Aid Act, Pupil Accounting Manual, the Revised School Code. Shared time guidance describes how public schools may engage with non-public and/or homeschool students when it comes to funding. So the definitions there are listed as a private, a non-public school student is a student attending an independent school, a private school, a parochial school, anything other than a public school or institution. Homeschooling is educating a student at home in an organized educational program. Now, eligible students, in terms of engagement, there's something called the non-essential elective courses, and they are anything the local school board identifies as non-core or elective in nature as courses that are available to these shared time students. They must be taught by a Michigan certified teacher and with appropriate endorsement, and could include anything like art, physical education, world languages, music, anything under that elective umbrella. Beyond non-essential electives, shared time students may also take classes such as career technical education, advanced placement, college dual enrollment, and in many cases, especially with the AP or the advanced placement and college dual enrollment, they do that through their local public school district. Move to the next. The next slide has a few examples of how we engage with and educate shared time students, non-public and homeschool in that category. The first example is non-public students enrolled in an elective course in their private school. So I don't know how aware many people are, but in terms of parochial or non-public schools, the elective teachers many times are staffed and employed through the local public school. So in doing so, providing that opportunity for teaching and learning for those elective courses happens in that instance as well. That teacher may also be a part of their local education association. So that's one example. Another example, it would be a homeschool student enrolled in an elective course at their local public school. It might be in the band, might take orchestra, maybe attending an AP course on site. Another example would be a homeschool student enrolled in a digital online elective course through their local public school or ISD or Michigan Virtual. Another example on the fourth bullet would be a non-public school student enrolled in a CTE course at the ISD, a digital online elective course through their local public school. And then the third would be, and these are all real life students, giving examples of how we're navigating with families and enrollments. A homeschool student engaged in a post-secondary, they're taking a college course, they're taking an online course, and they're taking an elective at the local high school. So in those instances, you're crossing multiple ways of measuring in terms of funding and all these different rules and regulations that have to be followed because you're now in multiple categories with shared time students. Funding is provided for shared time students and is calculated based on the number of courses the student takes. So, for example, if a non-public school student has a public school art teacher for one class, or a non-public school student has a public school teacher for one art class, and it's a 6-period day, that would calculate to 17% of the full-time equivalent equated student for funding purposes. If that student took that course the whole year, it would be a 0.17 or 17%. So here is where we get kind of caught up operationally. Here's the current School Aid Act language. I'm not 100% sure specifically when it was established. It was pre-COVID, but this is how it's referenced by MDE. It's referenced as the shared time growth cap. And that's the limitation that's placed on public schools, specifically with regards to funding. When it comes to engaging and educating students within our community or our region who fall under that definition of non-public or homeschool. Essentially, a public school may only receive funding for up to 5% of its total full-time equivalent equated students, or simply put, the full-time per student amount, only 5%. I'd like to reference the example at the bottom. I gave an example of an LEA district with 2,500 students, full-time. Let's say, for purposes of this example, all of those students are at a full-time equivalency. The shared time 5% growth cap would be 125. So only 125 FTEs could be claimed by that school district based on the current statute in the School Aid Act language under shared time. Now, let's say if that same district enrolls 500 shared time students, 400 of those students are taking 2 elective courses at maybe 2 different parochial schools in that area or region that are staffed by that local district. And then that local district also takes on maybe 100 homeschool students. And each of them are only taking 2 classes. Well, that would equate to 165 FTEs. So even though you might have 500 students, they're only taking a portion of a full schedule. So it would equate to 165. Well, as you can see, their cap is 125. So if they did that, they would end up paying a penalty of $400,000 because they've gone over the 5% cap. It gets very complex at times. Now, that said, districts that exceed that 5% cap, they pay that penalty, and once you've paid that penalty, you've entered into this new growth measure now. It becomes 10% of that 5% year over year. So for example, if that LEA district took the $400,000 hit, the next year they could enroll up to 137.5 FTEs. They could grow 12.5, which is 10% of that 5%. So this requires really close monitoring, and for the most part, it keeps schools keep their operations below 5%, and I'm sure you can see why. It becomes really convoluted. So let's talk about the challenges. I found a record of MDE representatives testifying in front of the same committee back in November of 2017, specifically regarding shared time students. I'm certain there was a purpose for instituting the shared time growth cap at that time and a desire to create some oversight and especially reduce spending. The landscape of education looks very different than it did in 2017, and digital learning, AI, and everything post-COVID has taken place, including a reduction of overall students attending public schools in the state of Michigan to a tune of 104,000, according to reports, student enrollment reports on michigansschooldata.org. That's a significant reduction in the number of students since the last time MDE testified on shared time students. Here are some of the challenges that we're facing when navigating rules and regulations while trying to find a way to provide access to high-quality teaching and learning to all students. Public schools have wait lists of homeschool students and families who want to engage or even re-engage with the public school. For example, in my district currently, we have over 400 students on a wait list because we've reached our cap and we can't enroll anymore. This happens year over year, and that's an average annual number for us. We're always 400 to 500. I have talked to superintendents who cannot enroll students that live within their district into non-essential elective courses, traditional courses, because they've already exceeded their cap. With many schools below the 5% cap, if their full-time numbers decline, the shared time percentage is also reduced, so it's doubly impactful for them. Instructional assignments for teachers, it requires thoughtful consideration, multiple variables that come into play when you're placing teachers, especially if the teachers have a split assignment between the non-public school and their public school district. And it makes it really challenging when you have placement requests from teachers. Districts find themselves struggling to effectively place teachers based on the needs of the private school if their enrollment increases, which you don't really have control over, and then you have more homeschooling students that maybe want to enroll part-time, then you have to evaluate teacher placement altogether. And then really try to anticipate the numbers and project. This barrier also marginalizes families who are on the fringes. In some cases, we're creating a larger divide with non-public school families. And from an organizational management perspective, monitoring the growth cap and requires a considerable amount of resources and time in order to do so. It's a balancing act, and if you get it wrong, you have a financial blow. The optics of that within your community and your stakeholders, it's not great. And even for those of us who are somewhat kind of know what we're doing, it's still a projection that you're making. Nothing is ever concrete until the school starts. So today, in terms of consideration, we're asking that removing the shared time growth cap from the statute. And what that would do would allow school districts to provide access to all students and remove the wait lists and re-engage and engage with families who are desiring to enroll part-time. And as I've experienced, those part-time families at times go into full-time status. It really does take that cultivation of relationship building and time to grow that. It would stabilize shared time student enrollments in light of any potential decline of full-time students. That percentage doesn't reduce, that would be gone. It would ensure timely, effective teacher placement in non-public schools. And it would reduce the operational burden and resources required to monitor the shared time growth cap that we are closely doing every single year. And quite honestly, it would promote an inclusive approach to shared time students and their families who desire to engage with their local public school. This is an antiquated policy that's creating problems for us today. And long after the policy has served its original purpose. And the State School Aid Act is subject to amendments and updates over time, just like this provision. And it's time for us to evolve based on the need of families. So thank you. And I am going to open it up to any questions regarding the shared time growth cap.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Glanville.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate how you closed out your presentation too, just pointing out that this is an old policy, nearly 10 years old and pre-COVID. So I can see where times have changed, and it's time for us to move forward and accommodate our students and families a little bit differently and better in this space. You referenced the School Aid Act. I was wondering if there's anything related to pupil accounting manual that is also something we need to look at here.
The pupil accounting manual is really just that interpretation of the statutes. So when you look at the pupil accounting manual, there are many different categories, cross-categorical as you're submitting and all of your documentation for audit. At this point in time, by removing the growth cap, you're simply removing the constraints of the number of students that you can pull into membership. So all that would do would, if you change the statute, the pupil accounting manual would adjust accordingly.
Okay. And then you mentioned a number of types of flexible learning, blended online, digital, virtual. And a little bit aside from the topic, would there be any advantage to perhaps combining those into one definition or maybe a new word?
Well, we're starting to use the word digital more because it is more broadly used. If you look at the virtual learning statute, the 21F statute, that has very specific language in it in terms of virtual learning, how pupil membership, and then the pupil accounting manual really reflects a lot of that language as well. So I'm not opposed to having better definitions. Even homeschooling, it's a really difficult term to try to find a definition for statutorily as you're going across all these different documents. So.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to thank you for being here today. We've spoken before,
Yes.
but I appreciate the relationship I have with Jennison and going back to the beginnings of your virtual program and working with your staff back when I was in the classroom. So
Thank you.
excited to have you here today, and thank you for your innovation and leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Glanville, it's my intent to try and do something with the pupil accounting manual. I think it needs a wholesale change. I would throw it out and start all over, and perhaps maybe a working group or something that we could start doing that. I know there's a lot of interest in trying to modernize our, clean it up, because I think it needs a lot of work. Representative Jenkins-Arno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question that's maybe a little off topic, and I appreciate what you guys are doing, but just kind of wondering how how sports plays into this, because I think this is the area where people are a little bit concerned that they're allowing some kids to come in just because they can, beef up their sports teams or whatever, and then, so I don't know. Can you address that a little bit?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you.
When first starting the digital program at Jennison, I applied as a non-traditional building to MHSAA with approval. So that's really a locally controlled decision. And Michigan's a locally controlled state. Each Board of Education can determine, based on their value network, what is allowed or what they will permit. I can only speak on behalf of my district. We self-impose a 3-class limit for shared time students. If you're part-time and you're taking core classes outside of the elective courses, then we really want to make sure there's a balance and that student is successful academically. But also MHSAA identifies that if a student is attending over 66%, then they are eligible for athletic participation if they're enrolled in your district. So that kind of almost kind of puts a governor on the amount of courses the student takes, because in our district it's not permitted. In other districts it is. Their Board of Education says, hey, yes, we want those students. We found it really challenging to try to determine eligibility week to week in working with all the different families in homeschools. So we found that this worked best for our district. But every district is different, and I love the fact that we have that local control to make those determinations.
Representative Beeson.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah. Do you think that your cost coming in is enough? Because like we have so many kids, we have one of our schools in our district is a 51% school of choice, and it's like there's no more room left. And to get to those AP classes, like we're sending so many kids to the junior college. Do you think that 5% cost is what they're paying? Is it worth it for the school to handle the child for that?
I think so, absolutely. Number one, we don't want to exclude them. Right. We want to engage with every family that is interested in wanting to enroll. But in terms of operations, many of these students are taking virtual courses, college courses, as you said. We are a large district, speaking of Jenison specifically, we're a large school of choice district as well. And making room, I mean, again, I would go back to the locally controlled boards of education.
Well, I have a couple children in a junior college, and I'm looking at that they send a report that what the school's paying for
Yes.
one class
Yeah.
is more than 5%. So that's why I'm saying is it beneficial for a school to take these students on when the junior college can actually get paid more? Because we have to fill that out in our tax thing. I just had to fill those out because they were paid by somebody else and not us. And it's pretty expensive for just one class for the young people to take at a junior college dual enrollment.
Yes.
And I was wondering if 5% is adequate to fund that.
It really does take the full 17%. So if they
Okay.
end up enrolling in, so if you take one dual enrollment course, you have to anchor it with another course in the district. So let's say a virtual or a digital art photography class, and then you're taking Spanish at Grand Rapids Community College, right? So you have that anchor course, and then that 17% for that one course is a little over $800 per semester, which is what we can take. Now, when you have students like your children, and they have multiple courses on their, let's say they've got a lot of room in their schedule, let's say they have a 6 scheduled class, districts can put that class and count it for 2 courses, so you get double the $800 to pay for that class. So we're saving money, millions of dollars. We've saved millions of dollars for parents being able to use state funds to pay for the college level courses, and that's important for us. And going back to your original question, yes, it's worth it. It is. It doesn't always create a revenue stream, but it also re-engages, and many students then end up in a full-time status.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Next up is parallel accountability for alternative education.
All right, good morning, and I'll echo the same sentiments. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today about a topic that is it's an incredible passion point. There are a number of educators in Michigan that are doing work in alternative education programs. It's challenging work, but it's great work, and this speaks directly to some of those items. So at different points this morning, you're going to hear me get a little excited. You might hear me even seem a little critical. Please don't receive it as that, though. It's simply trying to work through the challenges of the work and try to find some solutions that can benefit the whole. So parallel accountability for alternative education. Looking at our 3 bullet points, so in these next 15 minutes, we want to be able to get through really these 3 objectives. 1, we want to establish a basic understanding of the purpose and practice for alternative education, and along the way, dispel some of the historical misunderstandings. 2, we want to discuss critical challenges associated with a universally applied accountability system. And then 3, we want to consider some proposed language to create a parallel accountability system for alternative education programs. And so we'll dive into all of those things right now. Starting with the purpose, at the risk of oversimplifying really dynamic work, it's really twofold. 1, we want to provide a high-quality school experience for every single student, for all students, to echo some of those sentiments from earlier. And number 2, we want more graduates and less dropouts. And our programs strongly are targeted to do just that, for those to be our primary outcomes. So that is, again, an oversimplification, but I want to talk about the practice of alternative education. We believe that each learner is a unique entity with unique challenges and unique needs to achieve academic success. Now, I'm an instructional designer by training, and so I approach everything as a project. And when we look at when we stop looking at students as a whole, and we start looking at each individual student as an individual project, we can make some great gains that way. So I often say it this way: in our programs, we have 100 kids, we have 100 stories. The second part of that, conventional school models are built for the masses. Next part of that, alternative education programs are built for those peripheral populations. There are some incredibly strong conventional school models. Those programs are built for the masses. They're great programs, and they work for most, but not for all. Where alternative education comes into the mix is when we talk about those peripheral students, so that the students on the tail ends of the mass of all student populations. And the last bullet point there, effective alternative models, they embrace innovative programming in order to meet those unique needs of each learners. Really summarized, universal models don't universally meet the needs of all students. So some of the critical challenges, and this is where we kind of get into the meat of this topic. A universal accountability model, one, disproportionately identifies non-traditional schools as underperforming according to the Michigan School Index. That's number one. Number two, they create a disincentive for Michigan schools to operate alternative education programs, and I want to unpack those just a little bit with you today. So that number one, they disproportionately identify non-traditional schools as underperforming. One of the ways that they do that is if you look at the Michigan School Index report and you see a ranking of schools, you will see an incredibly high number of non-traditional programs that are identified as underperforming, particularly on the improvement list, the CSI list, the ATS list, the TSI list. These improvement lists, you might hear them called the naughty list sometimes in colloquial language when you're in schools. And so you have this disproportionate amount. Now, one of those things is when you get onto those lists, there are interventions applied. There are supports, there are resources that are applied to those programs to help, I'll air quote, to help fix those programs. The challenge, though, becomes that traditional interventions are often incompatible with non-traditional settings. So you bring in a traditional solution into a non-traditional school, and that doesn't always fit very well. So that's one element there. Another element, though, is that you have highly successful programs who have unimaginable success but end up on an underperforming list. And so what I think that creates is the canary in the coal mine scenario where you have a school that's doing remarkable, unbelievable work but ends up on an underperforming list, and they become this secret. And I would say often that they're put into the cellar when oftentimes I think they should be put onto the stage. And so those are the outcomes that we have. And when we think about interventions, we always think about, are they appropriate? Are they helpful? Do they achieve the intended outcome? And what we've seen in some of the programs that I work with and some of our colleagues in the PLTF are when a consultant is assigned to a CSI school that doesn't operate a conventional program, there's an incredible learning curve for that consultant to deconstruct their understandings of what learning typically would look like and what learning looks like in this particular program. And in some of those circumstances, you have that consultant comes in and realizes, oh my goodness, this is exceptional. How do I get you in front of other schools? So again, this is, by the metrics, an underperforming school, but in practice, I would consider them to be highly successful, unimaginably successful programs. So the second bullet point there, that a university accountability model disincentivizes Michigan schools from operating alternative education programs. The first bullet point I have there is accountability data. Alternative education, that data looks bad. It does. When you operate an alternative education program, according to those metrics, you're going to have lower graduation rates. You're going to have lower student proficiencies. You're going to have historically low student growth. Now, and I say that not as a detriment. You have to understand the stories of these kids and what ultimately leads them into an alternative education program. They have already struggled in school. That traditional model hasn't fit for them. They have ultimately, their pathway, typically a difficult pathway, has led them to this program. And so that data that travels with that student, it doesn't look good. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't give the best, most appropriate education, school experience to that kid. And that's what these programs are often trying to do. So the disincentive piece comes in here. As a local school district, I have to understand what that data actually represents, those student stories, right? But on the school index report, it does and will identify you as an underperforming school. The second part there, financial resources. Working with alternative education students in alternative education programs, it's big work. It's challenging work. It's not simple work. It's expensive work. It takes a whole different approach to what an academic program should look like. There are the specific needs of at-risk learners that we know require some extra resources and supports for those kids. It's a different approach to budgeting and enrollment projections. Now, our enrollment is coming from the state aid fund, the school aid fund. But when you budget for a very transient student population, there are unique challenges to that. I won't know how many students I have in my program next month. I won't know how many I'm going to have next year. In fact, I will guarantee that probably in the time I've been talking to you all today, we've had a student that has landed into one of our alternative education programs as we talk this morning. It's a transient population of kids. It requires unique staffing models to support the whole child and all of the elements of that story that led them into that program. It's different level of teacher qualifications. Even when you bring in a very veteran teacher from a very successful traditional school model into a non-traditional school model, and even if that non-traditional school model happens to be an alternative education program, it's different. It's a different skill set. It's a different application of that expertise. And there's a lot of training and preparation for those teachers that's built into that. And the list goes on. And I could speak until we ran out of time around that today. But the quick summary is it's hard work. It's important work. It's big work. It's challenging work. But it is hard work. It's unique work. So ultimately, the last part, the last bullet point there, the universal accountability model applied to alternative education programs, the big disincentive for Michigan schools is to operate these programs. It promotes the movement of off-track for graduation students away from traditional programs. And it's a beautiful thing when they end up in a really strong alternative education program. That's not the story for all of those kids. When they migrate away from that traditional program, again, some of them land there and others land nowhere. And they drop out and they don't re-engage with learning. And that's that critical element. We need strong alternative education programs for those that will catch those kids and meet those kids where their needs are at. And the current accountability model disincentivizes schools from doing that. I'll move on to the next one. So the proposal, we don't want to come with just complaints, right, and the challenges. We want to be able to provide at least some ideas or some foundation for some solutions there. We want to adopt language for a parallel accountability measure to be applied toward qualifying alternative education programs. Now, we've already talked a little bit about non-traditional programs, so we have to really, I'm hesitant to use the word alternative education because it comes with a connotation, it comes with a stigma, it comes with a stereotype. So when I say alternative education, I'm talking about a very specific type of school program, right? And so if I say non-traditional school programs, there are a number of non-traditional schools. I'm talking about a sliver of programs within that broad range of unconventional, school models, right? So just to be clear on that point, and let's dive into that. And so 4 points that we feel like the time that we've worked with this, that we would suggest and propose that would be included would be 1, to describe the qualifications for an alternative education program. 2, to ensure a parallel accountability system that is both rigorous, it must be rigorous, and also appropriate. We believe those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They don't. It needs to be rigorous, equally rigorous to any strong accountability model, but appropriate for that setting. The third bullet point, define key terms at risk and alternative and distinguish how these are considered in a school setting. And the fourth point, ensure that qualifying alternative education programs are reported separately from traditional school programs. And I'll dive into each of these hopefully relatively quickly, right? So that first bullet point, what is an alternative education student, or what constitutes an alternative education program, to have clear definition around that they are students, they are programs that serve a high focus of at-risk kids. They may be strict disciplinary academies or dropout recovery and prevention programs or adult education programs or programs that are previously identified as adult or as alternative education programs. So to have some clear definition around what an alt-ed program looks like. That second bullet point, they should be rigorous. They should meet the federal standards and the state standards. They absolutely, not should, they must be rigorous to that front. But the appropriate part, and this is where you get into some of the nuance of it. I would say the details are in the nuance, but you'll see the same metrics that you find on the Michigan School Index report listed here. Those are strong metrics. Those are things we should all strive toward, but again, appropriately applied toward a specialty program. So graduation rate is currently measured through a 6th cohort. We believe that we should still track kids who are graduating at age 20, 21, 22. And yet we should always have that goal. If a diploma is in reach for a kid, we should always strive toward that. When I talk about disincentivizing, there are a lot of school districts that when they get to that 6th year, they're no longer accountable for that. Whether they graduate or not, there's no benefit to doing that. So we often see those students drop off and drop out at that point, right? Number 2, student growth. This should be specifically targeted growth, closely measured growth, not annual growth. I talked about our transient student populations. We have students that are coming and going all the time based on life circumstances. So we need to measure growth while we have those kids. And sometimes the brief windows that we have those kids, we don't have them for 12 years, 10 years, 5 years. Rarely do we have them for a full 4 years. But we still need to be able to measure that growth and be held accountable to that metric. You'll see lower down on that list is student proficiency. Now, again, I talk about alternative ed data, feels like bad data. We have students that have had, for some of them, they have not participated in education for years and years. And they come into our programs and we're held accountable for their proficiency data. Even though we've just received that student, they maybe are in our program for 4 weeks, and that 4 weeks has been working hard to get to know the student, to identify their circumstances, to wrap around that student so that they can become ready to learn. But that data belongs to an alternative education program. And so those other 3 bullet points, so is it important? Yes. When we've had a student for a length of time, that proficiency over time, that belongs to us. But when a student lands into our program, that data, up until that point in time, we've not been able to control that data. We haven't owned that data. Give us some time with the kid before we're held accountable and reported accountable for that data. And then those other 3 you'll see listed just as reported separately: school quality, English learner, and assessment participation. You're going to see later on in the big ask, those are great things to track. Those are great things to be held accountable for. Different student populations, just we'd like them to be reported separately as an alternative education program. And I do want to make sure that we make the designation between at-risk and alternative. None of these are new terms that you see here. They're just separated from for clarity. A student can be at risk. A program can be alternative. And that's the critical difference between those things. Now, an alternative program traditionally is going to educate a large percentage of those at-risk kids. There's a number of qualifying factors that could identify you as at risk, but that's the student. Alternative, we're referring truly to the program. And that program the students are at risk of not graduating with their original class or cohort, or their individual needs are just not able to be met in a traditional setting. We could have a whole micro session just on this slide. I'll save you from that. If you want to, though, you can reach out to me. I'd love to have that conversation more in depth. So if you're not familiar with the Michigan School Index, you have a link there. You can find that information easily on the MDE website. You can dive into that. You could spend a lot of time looking into that. And really, what does it come down to? This last piece, we want to ensure that alternative education programs are reported separately from traditional school programs. The department may not include schools designated as alternative education programs along with traditional education programs in public reporting designed to evaluate the quality or performance characteristics of a school. They're not the same. I say that to be, again, overly simplify the matter, but they're not the same. And so when you have an accountability system that measures and reports them as the same, we have enough language in Michigan. We have enough language that says we acknowledge that these programs are important. We acknowledge that the work they do is different. We acknowledge that the challenges for these students are different, but our accountability system doesn't match that. And that's really what we're hoping to achieve here. So, summary of purpose, our constant pursuit in this field should be toward what is most beneficial for students, families, and communities. Alternative education programs are one of a suite of non-traditional programs that are a vitally important piece toward the academic puzzle, towards completing that educational puzzle. So I'll open it up for questions.
Representative Steckloff.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. I have a few questions, and I just want to preface it that you may not personally know the answer, and it might be something I have to get from the state. I used to do long-term substitute teaching at an alternative high school, which I'm probably going to say was 99% at risk. We have another alternative school that is mostly because of their working students, so I understand that's different. So speaking with the alternative high school, I used to substitute teach long-term sub at the one in Southfield. It has since closed. What happened was, and then in students who could not achieve success at that alternative high school, maybe still had truancy issues, things like that, they were then sent to Tri-County. No one wanted to be sent to Tri-County. I believe that's the name. Again, I can't believe I'm going to say this. This was almost 2 decades ago. So with schools like this closing, number one, do we know how many of our alternative high schools have closed within the last maybe 15 years? And number two, with those closing, and maybe whether a school is closing or whether a student couldn't achieve the success needed at a specific district alternative program and let's say had to go to Tri-County, how does that funding follow the student, or would it not follow the student? And after that, I have one more question.
Yeah, I won't give you the specifics of that first, how many schools have closed in recent years, but I can do some research and find that out for you.
Yeah.
In terms of funding, as long as they're enrolled in a qualifying program and they're able to be captured as funding, that funding would follow them. So if they're enrolled in a qualifying school, that state funding would go with them. As we talked about the pupil accounting manual and how that applies towards student count at FTE. So if they're in a program, that FTE is being counted by the operating district.
So, but what if a student like left halfway through and it wasn't a new school year?
Oh man, you got, how much time, what time is it?
I know, I could talk to you about this forever too.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I will
might
follow up with you directly, Rep. Steckloff.
I really appreciate that. And the last one is with the graduation rate. I know with our universities, it's set up by the federal government, and I just haven't really thought about the answer. With the graduation rate, do we, because I can see why schools would want to make sure that only 18, maybe 19-year-olds were staying in their public school because of graduation rates. Do we know if that graduation rate, typically it's like a 5-6 year, do we know if that's set up by the state or is that a federal government graduation rate?
The requirement, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the federal requirement in ESCA is that you hold schools accountable for graduation rate. Now the local state then gets to decide how they do that. Michigan has decided to do that with our Michigan School Index, and you're typically tracking students through a 4th-year cohort. You want every kid, so the highest weight category is when you graduate a student in 4 years. Now there still is a metric for year 5. There still is a metric for year 6, and that's where it ends. Now, for the programs that I work with, our average student is over 17 years old with 3 high school credits.
Yeah.
Now, it would be nearly impossible for that student to graduate with their 4th-year cohort. But the Michigan School Index is going to measure our program and our success to graduate that student with their 4th-year cohort, even though they've only recently arrived to us. We'll get some benefit for 5th and 6th, but when we graduate a student who is in a 7th or 8th year, I'll air quote high school because maybe they've had a gap in learning along the way. There's no credit for that. There's no benefit in the data to that. We've already passed that 6th-year cohort.
That's exactly what I wanted to know.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Kelly.
Great question.
Representative Jenkins Arno.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I just have comments. In between the time that I have been in the legislature, I worked for the Hudson School District in Lenawee County, and they have a great alternative education program there. And so they started that up just a few years ago, and I think within the first year they had 150 students. And when I left in December, it was over 250. Our class sizes were under 100, so that tells you how big that was for that school district. It's a great program. They've done all that you've said. They've set it up so that it's individualized learning for each student, and I just wanted to say that I've witnessed some of the students come in for their diplomas, and that is an amazing experience because they come in and they're kind of shy about it, and they're like, well, I'm here for my diploma. And then you just say, my goodness, what a great accomplishment you had, and you'd start asking them about what they want to do, and they've got plans for the future. This gave them hope to have a future. So one of them wanted to be a lineman, working for a utility company. Another one wanted to go in the Marines. There were just all kinds of stories. So it was a great program. I love what they're doing with that there. But they did experience that bad report, if you want to say. Recently, somebody posted in the media that they were the lowest school district in this county to have graduation. Their graduation rate was the lowest in the county. And they had to go back and say, listen, that's because you're including the alternative schools, students in that. And so, I totally agree with you. We need to look at that kind of separately so that their actual graduation rate was like 90 in the 90 percentile. But when you bring that in, it brings it right on down. But you're doing such great things for people and giving them a second chance. So I think it's a good program.
I'm going to pass that along to my team. I get to work with some really incredible human beings doing that work. And so that's heard by me and will be heard by them as well. Thank you for that.
Representative Glanville.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also for being here today. I just want to kind of clarify a couple of things. I think I heard you say, so students who graduate from alternative ed programs graduate with an actual high school diploma, and so that is different than a GED?
It is.
Can you just say a little bit about how the benefit of having a diploma over a GED?
Yeah, I sure can. GEDs are hard to get. They're incredibly challenging to get, and sometimes they don't come with the services and supports of a certified teacher. And so oftentimes when we have a student that, I've been really focused with my work for the last 6 years in alternative education. And when we have a student that comes to us and says, I think I'm just going to get my GED. I'm going to take a gap year as a 17-year-old. I'm going to take my gap year, and I'll just come back and get my GED. And I have to tell them, that's not an easy pathway for you. That's not an easy pathway for anyone. So if you ever meet anybody that says, I achieved a GED, shake their hand and pat them on the back. We want them engaged with our teams, our trained teams. The supportive pathway is that diploma pathway. So not that one carries or should carry more merit in the real world, but I would say one may be more achievable than the other.
Thank you. And then another question. You talked about how this accountability model can muddy the data for our alternative schools. So I'm thinking the flip must be true as well. By including that data in with our traditional schools, it's also pulling down, it's also muddying the data there, so it makes our traditional schools look less successful as well.
You are completely accurate on that, and Rep. Jenkins-Arno made a great statement. Now, I won't speak for other school districts, but I can speak for Berrien Springs Public Schools. We were recently in MLive reported as the second lowest graduation rate. Berrien Springs Public Schools was reported, as the second lowest graduation rate in the state of Michigan. We have a tremendously successful traditional education program on campus. If you visit that building, you're going to be blown away by some of the things that you see. But we have 3,500 alternative education kids that we're able to support statewide, partnering with other districts and operating non-traditional programs on campus and also away from our campus. That data, reported universally as our whole district, says that Berrien Springs doesn't graduate kids. But I will tell you this, last year, Berrien Springs Public Schools graduated over 1,100 kids. The strong majority of those kids had so little hope for graduation, but achieved graduation. So that's a school that is underachieving in terms of graduation. That's underachieving in terms of student proficiency and student growth metrics, graduating over 1,100 students last year alone. And so I look at those programs, again, I'm blessed to work with those people and represent those people. But I look at that is a story that should be told on the other side of that spectrum, not as an underperforming, doesn't graduate kids story.
No, thank you. I think that's a really interesting point. We hear a lot about concerns over the performance of schools in the state of Michigan, and by separating this accountability and making it match the program that the student is in, sounds like we might get some different results and stop tinkering with some of the other things. Yeah. Thank you.
And again, hats off to Berrien Springs for doing this. They don't have to. Many would choose not to. Many don't. You've dove in and without regard to those statistics, you keep plowing forward year after year with these same kinds of things and say, don't look over here, look over here. Again, appreciate that testimony.
Yeah.
Up next, we're going to have personalized learning and pupil accounting.
Again, I just want to thank you for allowing us to be here. I am encouraged by Representative Glanville when you said talk about personalized learning when Becky was talking, and then when you talked about pupil accounting, because when you were asking those questions, I'm like, oh, well, we're going to address that too today. So I do not represent one specific school district. I have a consulting company that I work with a lot of innovative schools. I have been doing that since about 2012. Prior to that, I was, I started in virtual learning, in digital learning with Baker College back in the late 90s. So I do have a breadth of experience. I do have a business degree, so like I look at education a little bit differently than sometimes educators who have been in the field, and that just gives me a unique perspective on finding solutions. So today I'm here to represent the Personalized Learning Task Force, and this image right here that you see is of a photo or an image that we use with the Personalized Learning Task Force to explain personalized learning to individuals. And you'll notice on there is the traditional model. Okay, as Personalized Learning Task Force, we're not asking to get rid of the traditional model in terms of having a school building and having people go in. Now, what happens in that building, yes, maybe some changes could be made there. But we want students to be able to know that they have options in their learning to create their own unique path. And all of these options, you'll see at the black banner across the top says, all options include highly qualified teachers, guaranteed and viable curriculum, and a support system. And so for students, it shouldn't matter which program that they are going into or which options they're choosing to personalize their learning. So today, our request that we have that I'll summarize at the end here is, it's really more than talking about removing the shared time cap or shared time students. It's more than just having alternative education and a different accountability system. It's really about students being able to personalize their learning path no matter what path they choose to have. So Michigan has made it very clear that it prioritizes individualized learning. Options to personalized learning exist in legislation and are touted by the Michigan Department of Education. In addition to virtual learning and shared time, MDE's website states that flexible learning options include the following. For college-bound students, they have AP dual enrollment, early middle college, IB programs, and articulated and direct credit. There's also career and technical education options and work-based learning, alternative education, testing out, and personal curriculums, which allow the flexibility on how credits are attained to reach your graduation requirements. And it's a really great tool that is available, but it doesn't address pupil accounting issues, which I'll talk about in a little bit. MDE's website also talks about having this flexibility for schools that don't necessarily address individual students. That would be having the flexibility to have a balanced calendar, running a competency-based education program, which when I looked at that really hasn't been revised or pushed isn't the right word, but promoted by the Michigan Department of Ed. There was in 2018, there was a 21J pilot grant for CBE, but since then there really hasn't been much innovation happening there. And then MDE also says they have the Innovation Council. And the Innovation Council was started in, I'm pretty sure, around 2016, and there really hasn't been any recent activity happening with the Innovation Council. But those options, they do say that those options provide flexibility. Also then in the 2019-20 Guidance for Academic Acceleration, MDE defines personalized learning this way. Personalized learning occurs when the student has a degree of choice over his or her education in terms of delivery, content, and pacing. Individual outcomes and how proficiency will be demonstrated are collaboratively defined. Students' interests and experiences and abilities guide his or her learning, making new information more relevant and meaningful. This approach has the potential to build the student's capacity and desire to learn beyond the scope of the curriculum and the confines of the classroom. So again, the MDE does define personalized learning, so we know it is a thing. And they've created this flexible learning guide in 2021. And that guide is to help Michigan school leaders create their own approach to student-centered learning, so that each district, like we've talked about this is local controlled, that they can take full advantage of the flexibility options. In that guide it says, there is no single definition of innovation, nor menu of acceptable innovative strategies. Innovation can be as big and bold as a radical redesign of teaching and learning experiences, or it can be as simple as a shift toward allowing students to organically form working groups and project teams to complete lessons. And it goes on to say, as expectations evolve around student-centered learning, as expectations evolve and student-centered learning takes on a more central role in the design of learning environments, school districts and schools increasingly need flexibility from state mandates in order to fully explore challenges, tweak standards and parameters as needed, and implement new models of instruction. And so as districts are trying to do that, through this guide, they say the way to do that are through these waivers that the MDE has available. And the waivers include the minimum hours and days, minimum daily attendance requirement waivers. Those are really for alternative programs. The minimum hours and days can be used for innovative programs, but they kind of talk about that being as like going to a 4-day school day instead of really looking at innovation more organically. They have travel time waiver, Labor Day waiver, common calendar waiver, school choice waiver. But when we think about this and we look at the law, and like, I don't know which one of them had said this, but the pupil accounting is created from the laws. So we do have the flexibility. It's in law. We're not asking for you to change laws to create more programs or different things like that. What we're saying is, instead of relying on the department for a variety of waivers to get flexibility needed to personalized learning, that we would like to have a process that's more streamlined for pupil accounting. And I'll explain that now. So the path to personalized learning for every student seems to stop at pupil accounting. Navigating the waivers and convoluted pupil accounting rules is cumbersome and prohibitive to implementing personalized education at scale. When a student chooses multiple options for their learning, the time and resources it takes to code them and follow the specific guidelines for each is an operational burden and hinders districts from scaling personalized learning. Now, Dr. Redmer already talked about how that burden is for districts who are using shared time, that accept shared time students. But for a district who may just take school of choice kids and they don't do shared time at all, they still have this, they can still have this burden in terms of all the different regulations that they follow for somebody like this student. Say there's a rural student interested in owning a bakery, and that student is enrolled in a CTE culinary course, takes 2 virtual classes and an in-person accounting course, and works at the local bakery to learn about packaging, marketing, and business concepts. That student's gonna be coded under 4 different programs. So that district has to follow the 4 different regulations for all of those different programs. Also, the district may need to navigate reporting for a student that wants to start their day at 6 o'clock in the morning, because most of the time bakery hours don't align with a school district day. So if that's the field they want to go into, they should have that experience of getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to make the donuts or whatever that commercial used to be. But most school districts are afraid to personalize at this level because they don't want to lose funding for reporting information incorrectly. I mean, think of it, if you're trying to do 4 different programs for one kid and you don't dot an I or cross a T, you're gonna lose some kind of funding, and they're afraid to do that. Also, from an operational standpoint, the district and ISD pupil accounting staff needed to scale personalized learning would be cost prohibitive under this current structure. And in addition to the fear of losing the funding just for reporting mistakes, districts are afraid that auditing staff's personal perception about non-traditional or non-conventional learning options will decrease their funding. For example, an MDE auditor announced at an auditor's conference that she wants to close down virtual schools and that she believes that online learning is ineffective. The Personal Learning Task Force has many examples of effective digital learning, but no one from the department has ever reached out to learn about those digital learning programs. Over the past 10 years, innovative districts have lost funding for thinking outside of the box, but remaining within the boundaries of the law. Some have recovered that funding after years of legal battles with the department, but the original story of the loss has deterred other districts from innovating. So as a group, we want schools to have the confidence in navigating the pupil accounting manual to do what is best for all students. As you know, the MCL 388-1701 lays out how district can receive state funding for their students. That basis is in subsection 3, which states each district shall produce or shall provide at least 1,098 hours and 180 days of pupil instruction. Yet cyber schools, dropout recovery programs, cooperative education programs, and alternative education programs with a waiver are exempt from, include travel time in, or reduce these hours. These programs have similar requirements that could be applied to innovative programs that personalize learning, freeing them from the multiple options, reporting, and tracking mentioned earlier. So that student who wants to be, own a bakery, they would fall under this innovative programming option. And in these kind of programming options, so when I talked about the cyber schools, dropout, cooperative education alternative, they have some of these things in there. I've kind of, some of them have them consistently, and others I've just kind of combined them. But if innovative programs were allowed to have their funding not based on that 1,098 hours, but more based on having a written plan. Some of these call it an individual development plan, an education development plan. Some of them call it a learning plan. But having a development plan that is collaboratively created by the student, a parent, and then having a certified teacher, school counselor, and then an advocate, mentor, or coach that's going to be with that student. And having that written plan with making sure that the student meets the state standards. The second one would be to have measurable goals that the student would achieve while in that program. And then, of course, if you're going to have goals, you want to be able to measure those so that either it could be the teacher or it could be the mentor coach person would meet weekly with the student to monitor and track satisfactory progress against the goals and the learning plan. And then to keep the administration and parents in the loop, having quarterly reporting of satisfactory progress for that student. And we all know that as life goes on, plans change. So like that plan is reviewed at least once a year to be able to revise to help that student. Maybe they were, when they originally planned it, they wanted to own that bakery. Now they're like, yeah, I'm not so sure I like getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So, looking at that plan and saying, okay, well then what is going to be your plan and how can we adapt that? So removing the 1,098 time requirement for innovative programs does not eliminate rigorous instruction, nor does it separate students from quality teachers. What it does is allow flexibility for the students to explore and pursue educational paths that make them excited about their learning and that does not cause an undue burden for school districts to administer. So our ask is to amend the State Aid Act with a subsection that permits accounting procedures aligned with other unconventional programs to remove barriers to scaling personalized learning for innovative school districts. So I would, before I summarize our ask at the end, I'd like to know if there are any questions that I can answer for this section of the presentation.
Yes. Vice Chair Glanville.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for addressing this particular issue. And I would love to get rid of the seat time completely, and I'll go on record saying that because any education professional can tell you time and seat does not equal quality education or learning. So thrilled about this, and also love your reference to the competency-based education piece. I've worked in that setting, designed curriculum in that setting. And it is the way that we operate in the real world. Mm-hmm. We all have, standards and expectations in our job, and you get your annual review, and you meet or don't, and then you change your plan to accommodate that. And it's not punitive; it's guiding you to be successful. And so I would love to see us implement more CBE, but that's a conversation for another day. So I wanted to just quickly ask, I think what I hear you saying is that a little less control at the state level and a little more control at the local level. Would that be fair? Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to bring to your attention that I believe the policy committee meets tomorrow for education. Is that correct? Tomorrow at 10:30. And there are a number of bills before that committee this week that seek to further tie down education and mandate certain courses and things must be taught. So I hope that you have a chance to review that and bring this conversation in that direction as well, because we need the policy to, be flexible as well. So I would hate to see us impose further challenges and barriers to allowing students to seek, their optimal educational experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Biff. Just wanted to add that when we had Dr. Rice here a few weeks ago or not, we talked about the Innovation Council and how that's been going on, and he didn't have a very good response from that. In fact, we were checking here this morning the website for the Innovation Council, no active links, there's nothing going on. They pay lip service in Department of Ed about innovation, about flexibility. They just simply don't do it or practice it. And it's, again, I was relieved and encouraged to hear of Dr. Rice's pending resignation, or when he resigns in October. I think he's been a disaster for this state, and I think that we need to get back on track and helpful for things like this. So I think that I think it's good to hear from Minority Vice Chair Glanville about her same concerns that I have. I think we've working with outdated kind of terms. I think that we need to clean up pupil accounting. We need to do all sorts of things, because I think that we are certainly after post-COVID, that this is a much more individualized world, and need to address it. And we can't just keep putting people in the same box and expect a different outcome. So I appreciate your presentation. I know you're going to wrap up with some additional things, so take it.
Yep. Thank you. So just a summary of our request for today is, one, eliminating that shared time growth cap. The second one is adopting that language for the parallel accounting measures for specifically alternative education programs. I didn't really address a lot about the exempting all virtual programs from the 1,098 hours. We have that in the cyber law. So in the pupil accounting, it's 50C is cyber, 50D is all virtual learning programs. So cyber programs, it does in the State Aid Act, I think it's subsection 12 or 13, somewhere around in there, it says that cybers are exempt from the 1,098 hours, but it only makes sense if it's a virtual program, it's a virtual program, and there aren't necessarily hours, because a student may work faster or a student may work slower. And then the last one is the one that's mostly about what I talked about, is that having some pupil accounting procedures that are different for innovative programs that can be addressed for students who want to create that pathway for themselves. So what we are ultimately asking, I was glad you brought up that you're having I think Representative Kelly, you mentioned having a working group or something like that. We would love to be able to provide input and work with you on anything that, we have. It's not just the three of us. There are a lot of others who are involved in personalized learning for students, and so we would be happy to provide input or share information at any time.
Thank you all for your presentation today. Very enlightening for the people that haven't heard these things before. Again, reminded of how important it is to the work that you do, and that we need to accommodate as much as possible so you can, continue to do the great things that you do. So appreciate your attendance here today and helping us out. No, we don't need a motion. So being no further business, meeting adjourned.